So now we're going to create some of bridge domains, and we're going to do that within our Army tenant. Again, I'm not going to worry too much about the Marines at this point. I was really just wanting you guys to see how we could leverage the tenants within ACI. So now we're really going to hone in on this Army tenant and start creating our networking constructs from within there. So really networking within ACI begins with, and for the most part ends with, bridge domains. And bridge domains, dumbed down, they're really just containers for subnets, okay? So a bridge domain, if you guys have studied traditional VXLAN, like where we actually have to manually go in and configure VXLAN, they also have bridge domains within there. And what you can do is you can tie that to many, many subnets. You can overlap subnets between bridge domains as long as those bridge domains belong to different context or VRFs, okay? So you can't duplicate a subnet within a bridge domain. You have to duplicate it between context or VRFs. And that's the same as traditional IP networking, right? If you want to duplicate IP space, you have to do that in separate VRFs. Same thing in ACI. So again, let's go full screen here. So what we'll do is we'll go over to this Army tenant and see I'm on tenants, Army, and what we're going to do is come down here. I'm actually just going to click on this. It should give me, let's go to the quick start. Networking, and we can see now that we're on networking, we see this VRF prod. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this bridge domain, and this is one of the new features within ACI, is now we can just take this and just drag it down here. See how it's got that little dropper? As soon as we exit that little dotted line, it goes away, but once we get in there, we see how that line connects these two kind of together. So what we're going to do is just drop that in, and it should bring up a screen here where we can begin configuring our bridge domain. So again, dumbed down, it's really just a container for subnets. What's happened is, the last 15 to 20 years, what we've been doing is really merging this concept of layer 2 and layer 3 within VLANs. Right? VLANs were supposed to just be broadcast domains, but now they've become tied on this one-to-one basis with IP subnets, and that's where we put a lot of our services, our quality of service, our filtering, and it's just not, we haven't changed how we network, and this is really the first step in that. Now, again, these bridge domains that we're creating here, this bridge domain that we're about to create, can have many, many subnets within it. And you'll see that when we go in here, we're actually going to be creating 3 different subnets within this individual bridge domain. Okay? And again, what we'll see is that an SVI is going to be created for this bridge domain across all of our different leaf switches. We won't see that show up on the leaf switches until we actually get some endpoints hanging off of them, but know that that's kind of what's going to happen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to name this quite simply Army BD, which stands for bridge domain. Again, I try to keep it pretty simple. We could say Army colon, actually we can't say colon there. So yeah, we'll do a hyphen. We'll say Army dash bridge domain. So forwarding, optimize or custom. A lot of people get confused by this, so I'm going to go ahead and drop this down and select custom here so you guys can see what's contained within here. So basically, bridge domains now are flooding domains and benefit from some optimizations done within ACI. A lot of these benefits include, we can have no ARP flooding by default, /32 based routing within the fabric, proxy lookups for unknown unicast, and these pervasive IP anycast gateways that we'll see that are on the leaf switches actually, once we actually get endpoints present. Now, traffic within the bridge domain is going to be bridged. Okay, no matter if it's 15 different subnets, if it's within the same bridge domain, it's bridged. When you go between bridge domains, that's when we actually start to leverage routing, because a bridge domain is really just a VXLAN VNI. Okay, so it's just a VXLAN VNI. So what we're going to do is create this Army bridge domain, and we're going to let it leverage some of these benefits, which again, typically we're just going to leave this at optimize, which is going to use these default values. But when you click custom here, it really allows you to see. So for layer 2 unknown unicast, we're going to allow this to be hardware proxy. So by default, if an unknown unicast frame comes in on one of the leaf switches, the leaf's going to query the spine for a lookup in this global table or this hardware proxy table. We could turn this off and basically flood the unknown unicast within the fabric. So again, we could choose between hardware proxy and flood here. I'm going to choose or just leave it at the default of hardware proxy. Same thing with layer 3 unknown multicast flooding. We can leave that at flood or optimized flood. We're just going to go ahead and leave that at the default of flood. And then multi-destination flooding, we're just going to flood within the bridge domain. So this is used for layer 2 multicast, broadcast, and link layer traffic. By default, the system's going to flood that within a given EPG within the bridge domain, or you can drop it. So what we're going to do is we're going to flood within the encapsulation domain or the bridge domain, which again is the default. So we're just going to basically go with that. Okay. Endpoint retention policy, we'll just use the default endpoint retention policy for that. Notice we don't have to put anything in here if we don't want to. So I'm just going to leave this guy at the default value. We'll go down here and click OK. And notice now that the Army bridge domain, whoops, see if we can get into it here, has been created. Now what we can do is we can go within this layer 3 configuration, and this is where we can actually start to put in the subnets within the bridge domain. I could have done it on the last screen, but I went ahead and clicked OK there. So this is where we're actually going to add these layer 3 subnets to the individual bridge domain themselves. So what we see here, we have a custom MAC address. We could configure a virtual MAC address if we wanted to. What we're going to do is come over here and add subnets. So here's how we add subnets, and this is a little bit tricky within ACI because we're going to use 3 different subnets. We're going to use 192, 168, 200, 201, and 202. So what we're going to do here, notice that this isn't just the subnet. This is the gateway. So we're going to put in 192.168.200.254/24. Again, this is the gateway IP address, all right, not just the subnet IP. So I'm going to go ahead and put in that. I'm not going to use this. This is if you actually extend 2 ACI domains together. We could treat this as a virtual IP address across 2 different ACI fabrics, so we don't need that. And what we're going to see is if we put a couple different IP or subnets within this bridge domain, one of these is going to be the primary IP address of the bridge domain, and the others are going to be secondaries. So kind of what we'll see here, since we're attaching 3 subnets to this bridge domain, we're going to have 192.168.200.254, 201.254, and 202.254. So one of these is going to be the primary IP address, okay, on this gateway, and the others are going to be secondary IPs. And we'll see that on the leaf switches once we get it, once we get endpoints actually pushed out to them. So if you wanted to ensure that one of these was the primary, we could come in here and say, make this IP address primary. We're not going to worry about that too much right now. I'm just going to let the system decide which one. It doesn't really matter, right? Because traffic within this bridge domain is just going to be bridged. So I'm just going to leave this blank. Right now we're going to make this a private, basically a private subnet. So this checkbox right here, this is basically saying, hey, this is never going to leave the fabric. So we're never going to advertise that out of the fabric. We can change this later. We also have this advertised externally as well as shared between VRFs. So if we're going to do any route leaking, we would share this between the VRFs. We'd leave this box checked. But notice these 2 are like a radio button. You can only have one or the other. You can't have both, okay? So this advertised externally, this is basically the equivalent, like if you're running OSPF outside of the fabric, this is basically the equivalent of going in there and saying IP router, you know, OSPF, CCIE DC, area 0, right? It's basically the equivalent of putting a router statement on it. Again, because using this means we're going to actually advertise these guys out of the fabric. I am going to leave this as private for now. That way I can show you how, you know, when we set up routing later, how they're not advertised out until we come in and we actually check this box. Again, you can come back later and do that. We are not going to do whoops, any layer 3 outs or route profiles yet, so I'll just go ahead and click submit here. And notice now that we have the first one in there. We'll go ahead and add the other two. So I'll say 192.168.201.254/24. Again, we'll leave private. And I'll do the last one here, 192, whoops, fat fingers today, 192.168.202.254/24. And we'll say OK. Now again, we can't really go out and do anything special to verify on the leaf switches yet, because these gateways aren't going to show up until we actually get some endpoints attached. So once we do get some endpoints attached to those leaf switches, we'll go out there and verify that we now have a pervasive gateway with one of these guys as the primary and the other two as secondary IP addresses off of that guy. So I'm going to go down here and we'll go ahead and click submit. So now we have a bridge domain hanging off of our VRF prod, okay? So technically I could go into the Marines at this point and I could configure a bridge domain off of their VRF prod with the exact same subnets in it, okay? And would that matter? No, absolutely not, right? Because now we have two completely separate VRFs. We can duplicate IPs within those two VRFs, okay? Because it's basically two different routing tables. And again, we're going to get into the CLI a little bit more because we haven't yet pushed any of this information out to the lease because we don't have any endpoints attached. So we'll be getting to that very, very soon.